Hi and welcome to this free video tutorial series from Pro Tools Expert, looking at the Dolby Atmos home entertainment workflow. In the first two episodes of this series, we looked at the input and output device settings for the Dolby Atmos production suite and Pro Tools when using the Dolby Audio Bridge. And in the second episode, we looked at the workflow that Avid and Dolby recommend for trouble-free operation when using the Dolby Atmos production suite with Pro Tools and the Dolby Audio Bridge. In this episode, we'll be taking a look at an alternative workflow that we've exclusively developed to help bring some enhanced features to your native workflow, commonly only found when using HDX and a separate hardware Dolby Render Master unit. This workflow uses a combination of hardware and software and has proved to be very reliable and useful when mixing for Dolby Atmos home entertainment with a native workflow. You will need a Dante audio interface such as the Focusrite Red 16 line that I'm using with the RedNet control software, Ordinate's Dante Virtual Sound Card software with the Dante controller, and the Source Nexus Pro plugin from Source Elements. Using these, you can achieve the one thing that's vitally missing from the native Dolby Atmos workflow and Pro Tools, being able to bring in the all-important re-renders, the automatic fold-downs that the Dolby Atmos renderer can make back into Pro Tools as live audio. So let's take a look at this workflow. Our first step will be to ensure that both Pro Tools and the Dolby Atmos production suite are not running. Then fire up your Dante Virtual Sound Card and check the settings on that. Make sure that the network interface that the Dante Virtual Sound Card is looking at is the same as the network interface that your Focusrite or Dante interface is connected to. As the Red 16 line has 32 channels of Dante output, it makes sense to select the 32x32 option on the Dante Virtual Sound Card. Once you're happy with all your settings, click Start. And you'll see that the Dante Virtual Sound Card appears as a device on your aggregate output and in your audio MIDI settings. As per episode 2, we now need to set up an aggregate audio device for the Dolby Atmos production suite to output to. First, we'll start with the Focusrite Thunderbolt interface, then the Dante Virtual Sound Card, and finally the Dolby Audio Bridge. Enable drift correction on your Dante interface. At this point, it is worth checking that your Dante interface is enabled as the preferred master. It's important that these interfaces, both hardware and software, are added to the aggregate device in this order. Then you can start your Dolby Atmos renderer, and as per last time, it will come up with an audio driver error message, which is simply because you have changed the properties of your aggregate device. Dismiss that message, and we can now go to the Dolby Atmos renderer preferences window. Select your audio driver as core audio, your audio input device as the Dolby Audio Bridge, as per last time, and your aggregate device as your output. Processing and speaker settings can stay the same, as can the headphone processing. Going to the re-render setting, you can now enable re-render processing, which is vital for getting audio out of the re-renders live into Pro Tools. Click Accept once you're happy with your settings. Now go to the Room Setup window and go to the Routing tab. This is where the specific routing that I mentioned in episodes 1 and 2 comes into play. I have my headphones set to outputs 13 and 14 and my re-render channels starting from output 17. This is in order to give a round number from which to route the output of the Dolby Atmos production suite through the Focusrite Red 16 line with the most effective use of its own internal routing. Click Accept when you're happy. We can now go to the re-render settings. Here you can add various fold-downs in various formats from the output of the Dolby Atmos production suite. It's a case of selecting the layout you want. In my case, I want a 5.1 loudness output. So add that and route it to the appropriate outputs. You will see that it is laid out in the Dolby SMPTE format that we discussed in episode 1. Bear in mind the Dolby Atmos production suite uses the SMPTE output layout, whereas Pro Tools will only accept the film layout. We'll explore more sophisticated routing and the routing of stems in a later episode. Click Accept when you're happy. We now need to set up the output routing of our Dante device, in my case the Focusrite Red 16 line. So, open the RedNet control software that comes with the Focusrite interfaces and select the Output Routing tab. I have very specific routing from the analog outputs and the ADAT outputs, as I use separate digital to analog converters. In order to route the correct outputs to your Dante stream, you need to go and select the Dante option here. This gives you the ability to feed the Dante outputs from whichever playback source you require. As you can see here, I have set this up so that Dante outputs 1 upwards are sourced from playback channel 17 upwards, which tallies with the setting in the Routing tab of the Room Setup menu in the Dolby Atmos Production Suite. In the RedNet control software, it's an easy process of just simply changing whichever routing you want to be appropriate to your setup. Next, you need to fire up the Dante controller software. This will give you a routing matrix between your hardware Dante interface and your software Dante virtual sound card. You can expand the routing matrix here and route the outputs of your Dante interface to your Dante virtual sound card accordingly, bearing in mind that the Dolby Atmos Production Suite uses the SMPTE output, whereas Pro Tools will only accept the film layout. So as you can see, I have routed the left, right, center, subwoofer, left surround and right surround outputs of the Dolby Atmos Production Suite to the correct order inputs of the Dante virtual sound card using the Dante controller software. You can now fire up Pro Tools. In order to get the re-render output of the Dolby Atmos Production Suite back into Pro Tools, you need to make a new 5.1 aux input track. Disable the output routing for the moment to ensure that you do not get any nasty digital howlround. We then need to insert the Source Elements Source Nexus Pro plugin. You then need to route the receive part of the plugin from the appropriate Dante virtual sound card inputs. You can see that they are arranged in batches of 6, as this is a 5.1 aux input. It's worth having a dummy bus set up in your session, which is just a bus that doesn't go anywhere, so that you can absolutely ensure it will not cause digital howlround, but does enable you to check that there is signal flow through your plugin. Disable the output of that dummy aux input. You can even hide and deactivate it. So if we now hit play, you will see that the 5.1 re-render is coming back into Pro Tools from the Dolby Atmos Production Suite. You can add as many Source Nexus Pro plugins as you like into a session, which enables you to bring in multiple stems and mixes and do live fold downs using your own control over loudness and dynamic range. My sessions normally have a more sophisticated setup, as you can see, which does simultaneous dynamic range control and stereo fold downs from the 5.1 re-render returns, including the stems. We'll take a look at the best way to do mastering and re-recording back-in of stems and final mixes in a later episode of the series. One thing to note though, that as the Dolby Atmos Production Suite is in effect another piece of native software, which doesn't have latency compensation, depending on the power of your host computer, there will be a finite delay or latency in the re-renders coming back into your system. However, being able to get the re-renders back into your system is very handy to be able to use your own choice of loudness monitoring and dynamic range control. So that's our exclusively developed alternative workflow for mixing Dolby Atmos home entertainment with a native Pro Tools system. Come back for the next episode where we will be exploring mixing techniques to help you keep the loudness of your Dolby Atmos mixes in control and compliant with delivery requirements. See you soon.